The evening Lady Evelyn Vale was declared dead. London was dressed in rain. Water streamed down the tall windows of Blackthorne House, turning the lamps outside into trembling halos of gold. Inside, beneath carved ceilings and the pale glow of a dying fire, Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood perfectly still while Evelyn's father delivered the sentence that would divide his life into before and after. "There has been an accident, Your Grace." Adrian stared at him. "Lady Evelyn?" Lord Vale lowered his eyes. "She is dead." For several seconds nothing moved. The clock on the mantel continued its measured ticking, absurdly calm against the silence that followed. Adrian's gloved hand tightened around the silver watch he carried, the same watch Evelyn had once teased him for winding too carefully. "No," he said at last. It was not denial so much as disbelief given a voice. Lord Vale sighed with practiced sorrow. The carriage overturned near the river. The horses bolted. The water was high. "Where is she?" "My daughter cannot be shown." Adrian's eyes hardened. "I did not ask whether she could be shown. I asked where she is." A flicker passed across the older man's face before grief returned to its proper place. The river took much of her. Adrian had faced cavalry charges without flinching. He had stood before ministers who threatened his estates and answered them with cold patience. Yet the thought of Evelyn beneath dark water stripped him of every defense. He remembered her laughing in the conservatory 3 weeks earlier, sunlight caught in her chestnut hair, one hand resting against a white rose while she told him that flowers were fortunate because nobody expected them to explain themselves. He had promised to return that evening. He had been delayed by Parliament. She had been waiting. Now supposedly she was gone. Adrian demanded to see the place where the accident occurred. Lord Vale refused. He demanded the physician's name. Again refusal. When he asked why there had been no message sent to him before the burial arrangements began, Evelyn's mother began to weep. "She suffered enough," she whispered. The words silenced him. Not because he believed them, but because grief had made him suddenly uncertain of every question he might ask. By midnight, the household had accepted the tragedy. By morning, society had already begun whispering. Poor Duke Blackthorne. He had lost the woman he intended to marry. Adrian never confirmed the engagement. Evelyn had never publicly announced it. Their affection had lived in the protected territory between intention and declaration, where a glance could become a promise and a promise could still be denied. 3 days later, Adrian stood alone in a chapel while rain struck the stained glass windows. There was no coffin. Lord Vale claimed the remains were unrecognizable. Adrian stared at the empty space before the altar and understood, with a bitterness that would remain for years, that he had been denied even the dignity of saying goodbye. Then Evelyn disappeared from his life. 5 years passed. The Duke of Blackthorne became a man London respected and quietly feared. He attended dinners, signed estates, received ambassadors, and danced when etiquette demanded it. But he never married. Rumors followed him like winter fog. Some said he had loved Evelyn so deeply that no other woman could replace her. Others claimed he had grown cold because grief had made tenderness impossible. Neither was entirely true. Adrian had not stopped loving Evelyn. He had simply learned to hide the wound. Blackthorne House changed with him. Its grand rooms remained beautiful, but beauty could not disguise loneliness. The marble corridors gleamed beneath servants' hands. Portraits watched from gilded frames. Fireplaces burned through winter evenings without warming the silence. Then, on a wet November morning, a new maid arrived. Her name was Nell Grey. She was young, though hardship had given her face a gravity beyond her years. Her brown hair was pinned beneath a plain white cap, and her dark dress was faded at the cuffs. She carried no jewelry except a tiny silver chain hidden beneath her collar. No one in the household paid her much attention. That suited her perfectly. She was assigned to the west corridor, where rainwater and mud had been carried across the polished marble by careless boots. Kneeling beside a brass bucket, she dipped a cloth into cold water and began to scrub. She worked quietly, carefully, as though every movement had been rehearsed. Adrian entered the corridor without warning. He was halfway toward the library when the maid began humming. He stopped. The melody was soft enough to vanish beneath the rain, yet he knew it instantly. 4 notes rising, 3 falling, then an unfinished pause. Evelyn's melody. She had hummed it in the conservatory while arranging roses. She had hummed it beside the lake. Once, smiling shyly, she had told him she would finish it when she finally found something worth putting into music. Adrian turned slowly. The maid remained kneeling. Her hand had frozen against the marble. "Where did you learn that tune?" he asked. She looked over her shoulder. For one terrible, miraculous second, the years disappeared. Adrian saw the same hazel eyes, the same delicate curve of her mouth, the same small scar beside her left eyebrow, a mark she had received falling from a pony when she was 17. His breath caught. The maid lowered her gaze. "I do not know, Your Grace." Adrian stepped closer. She rose, but her hands trembled. He studied her face as if searching for the woman he had buried without a grave. "Look at me." She obeyed. The room seemed suddenly too small for the silence between them. Adrian whispered the name he had not spoken aloud in 5 years. "Evelyn." Her eyes filled with tears. But she shook her head. "Your Grace," she said softly, "you mistake me for someone who no longer exists. Someone whom the world declared dead, and whom I learned to bury myself long ago." Adrian did not move. The maid's words settled between them with the weight of a funeral bell. Somewhere beyond the tall windows, rain whispered against the glass, but inside the corridor there was only the faint drip of water from her cloth onto the marble. "Who taught you that song?" he asked. "No one." "Then why do you know it?" She folded her hands. "Perhaps I heard it somewhere." "You did not." His voice remained controlled, yet something beneath it trembled. "I wrote the final 4 lines myself." Her eyes lifted sharply. That single reaction was enough. 5 years of mourning had taught Adrian patience, but not mercy toward falsehood. He stepped nearer, studying the face that had haunted his dreams with a devotion he had never confessed to another soul. "You have her eyes." "Many women do." "Her scar." "Coincidence." "Her voice." The maid swallowed. "And her habit of folding her left thumb beneath her fingers whenever she is frightened." Her hand immediately tightened. Adrian closed his eyes. For one moment, hope frightened him more than grief ever had. "What is your name?" "Nell Gray." "Your real name?" Silence. She looked toward the servants' staircase, measuring escape against dignity. Adrian saw the calculation and stepped aside, leaving the passage open. "I will not stop you," he said. She stared at him. "If you are truly Nell Gray, you have nothing to fear." "And if I am not?" His expression changed. "Then I fear I have already lost you twice." Her lips parted, but no answer came. A housemaid appeared at the far end of the corridor carrying folded linen. Nell immediately lowered her eyes and resumed her work. Adrian walked toward the library without another word, but neither of them believed the encounter had ended. For the remainder of the morning he watched. He did not summon her. He did not question the housekeeper. Instead he observed the smallest details. Nell knew which books in the library required careful dusting because their leather bindings had cracked with age. She knew that the west window rattled whenever the wind came from the river. She placed white roses in the drawing room and removed one with a bruised petal before anyone else noticed. Evelyn had done the same. But memory could be treacherous. Grief could teach the heart to manufacture resemblance from shadows. Adrian needed proof. That afternoon, he found Nell polishing a silver tray in the servants' hall. "You may leave that." She rose quickly. "Your Grace." He placed a small object upon the table. A silver lily-shaped hairpin. Nell became utterly still. Adrian remembered giving it to Evelyn on a spring afternoon 5 years earlier. She had laughed when he called it sentimental, then tucked it into her hair and told him that lilies survived beneath snow. He had kept the matching pin. He had believed this one was buried with her. "Where did you get it?" he asked. Nell touched the edge of the table, not the hairpin. "I found it." "Where?" "I do not remember." "You remember everything else." Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Not everything worth remembering." The answer struck him harder than accusation. Adrian lowered his voice. "Why are you here?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because I needed work." "That is not the whole truth." "No." "Then give me the rest." She shook her head. "Not yet." The words were spoken without defiance. They sounded like fear. Before Adrian could respond, the library bell rang for afternoon tea. That evening, Blackthorne House filled with guests. Adrian had invited several prominent families to discuss a charitable foundation, but the gathering quickly became what aristocratic gatherings often became: a theater of smiles, silk, gossip, and carefully concealed cruelty. Nell entered carrying a tea service. She moved quietly among the guests. Then Lady Beatrice Harcourt looked directly at her. The porcelain cups slipped from the woman's fingers and shattered against the carpet. Everyone turned. Lady Beatrice stared at Nell as though she had seen a corpse rise from the grave. "Good heavens," she whispered. Adrian's attention sharpened. "What is it?" The woman's face had gone pale. "That girl?" Nell froze. Lady Beatrice rose unsteadily. She resembles Lady Evelyn Vale. A murmur swept through the room. Nell lowered her head. Adrian stepped between them. That is enough. But your grace, look at her. I have. His voice silenced the room. He turned toward Nell. She stood rigidly, dignity holding together what fear threatened to break. No servant in my household, Adrian said, will be accused of being a ghost merely because society prefers its dead to remain convenient. The guests fell silent. Nell looked at him then, and something vulnerable passed between their eyes. Gratitude. And perhaps the faintest trace of the girl he had loved. Later, long after the guests had departed, Adrian entered the library and found Nell standing before a locked cabinet. She turned sharply. I was instructed to dust here. You were. His gaze moved to the cabinet. You knew it was locked. Nell said nothing. Adrian approached slowly. Only one person besides myself knew what this cabinet contained. Her face lost its color. He placed the silver lily hairpin beside the key. 5 years ago, I was told Evelyn Vale died. Nell's eyes glistened. Adrian's voice broke for the first time. I buried her without a body. He pushed the hairpin toward her. If you are not Evelyn, tell me who you are. She reached for it. Her fingers trembled. Then she whispered, she was never buried. Before Adrian could speak, a servant entered carrying a sealed letter. It has just arrived for your grace. Adrian broke the seal. The handwriting belonged to Lord Vale. The message contained only one sentence. Your grace, stop searching for our dead daughter. Adrian looked at Nell. For the first time, he understood that her family had not merely lied about Evelyn's death. They were still deeply afraid she might be found. The letter remained on the library table long after the servant had withdrawn. Adrian read it again, then folded it with deliberate care. The paper trembled only once between his fingers. Across the room, Nell stood beside the window. Rain blurred the gardens into dark streaks of silver, and the last leaves clung to the branches like things unwilling to surrender. You knew they would write, Adrian said. She did not turn. I knew they would be frightened. Of you? Of what I remember. He crossed the room. You said she was never buried. Nell closed her eyes. I said what was true. Then stop protecting people who tried to erase you. Her shoulders stiffened. You think truth is simple because you have never had to survive it. The word struck him with quiet force. Adrian stopped a few paces away. You are right. She looked at him. He had expected accusation, perhaps tears. Instead, she saw something more dangerous in his face, humility. I spent 5 years grieving the woman they described to me, he said. I never asked what she might have endured before they declared her gone. Nell's expression softened, but only slightly. They made me leave before dawn, she whispered. My father told me that if I spoke, the Duke would suffer. He said your name as though it were a weapon against me. Adrian's jaw tightened. What did they fear you would tell me? She looked toward the locked cabinet. Those papers. Adrian followed her gaze. The cabinet was old oak, bound with black iron, its keyhole almost invisible beneath years of polish. What papers? Letters? Accounts? Names? Names of whom? People who gave money to charities, then used those charities to purchase influence. Judges, politicians, landowners. Men who publicly praised virtue while privately buying silence. Adrian understood the danger immediately. And your family? They kept the records. Why? Because knowledge is valuable when powerful people are afraid of it. Her voice became quieter. I found the first letter by accident. Then another. When I told my father I intended to bring them to you, he locked me in my room. Adrian's hands curled. What happened next? I escaped. And the carriage? Her eyes lowered. There was no carriage accident. The room seemed to lose its warmth. They took me to a small house outside Bath. My mother came with me. She cried constantly. My father told everyone I had died. Why did they let you live? Because dead women cannot testify, but frightened women can still be controlled. Adrian looked away. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. What happened after? I was given another name. Nell Gray. I worked where I could. Kitchens, laundries, nurseries, houses where nobody cared enough to ask who I had been. He stared at her hands. The fingers that once held rose petals now carried tiny scars from years of work. And you came here deliberately. Yes. Why? She hesitated. Because I needed to know whether you had changed. Adrian's eyes met hers. I did. I know. You watched me. For months. Why? Because loving someone from memory is dangerous. Her voice broke softly. I needed to know whether I loved you or merely the man I remembered. Adrian stepped closer. And now? She looked at him for several seconds. Now I am afraid that I still do. Neither moved. The confession was barely louder than the rain, yet it filled the entire room. Adrian reached for her hand but stopped before touching it. You need never fear me. I do not fear you. Then what? That I will believe you. He frowned. She explained. If I let myself believe that you still love me, then I must also believe that the years between us can be forgiven. I have already forgiven them. You cannot forgive 5 years for me. No, he said. But I can refuse to waste a sixth. Her eyes filled. For one fragile moment, the woman beneath the servant's dress and the duke beneath his title stood without either disguise. Then Nell drew a breath. The missing evidence is here. Adrian turned toward the cabinet. Where? I hid the final letter before they took me away. Where? In this house. His expression sharpened. How? She approached the fireplace and touched the carved stone above it. When we were young, you showed me this library and told me the house had secrets older than either of us. I remember. You also told me that if I ever needed to hide something from a man who believed himself clever, I should put it somewhere he would never think to look. Adrian stared at the mantel. You remembered that? I remembered everything. She pressed a small section of carved marble. A hidden compartment clicked open. Inside lay a narrow ivory envelope. Adrian reached for it. Nell caught his wrist. If we open that letter, there is no returning to the life we have been pretending to live. He looked at her hand around his wrist. There was never a life worth returning to. She released him. Adrian opened the envelope. The paper inside contained names, dates, payments, and one final signature. His face hardened. Adrian moved instinctively, but Nell seized his sleeve. Do not chase him. He has the evidence. And if he knows what you have discovered, he will lead us directly to the people who ordered my disappearance. Her composure surprised him. You have been planning this. I have been surviving it. Adrian studied her. 5 years had not made her weak. They had sharpened her. Then we faced them together. Nell shook her head. No. This time we make them face me. In front of everyone. Before he could speak, the library door opened. A shadow crossed the threshold. Someone had been listening. The envelope vanished from Adrian's hand. And when he turned, he saw not a servant fleeing into darkness, but a familiar figure from within his own household running toward the night. The shadow vanished into the darkness before Adrian could reach the door. He stopped beneath the archway, listening to hurried footsteps fade beyond the rain. Nell stood behind him, pale but composed, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the desk. Who was that? She asked. Adrian did not answer immediately. He knew the footsteps. More importantly, he knew the hesitation before them. It belonged to Mr. Hawthorne, his secretary of 7 years, a man who possessed keys to nearly every room in Blackthorne House and knew the Duke's private affairs better than most members of his family. He has betrayed me, Adrian said quietly. Nell shook her head. Perhaps he has betrayed himself. She stepped toward the window. He stole the letter because someone promised him something. Money? Protection. Adrian studied her. You speak as though you understand him. I understand fear. The words silenced him. For 5 years, fear had been the invisible architect of her life. It had dictated where she slept, what name she answered to, and how long she allowed herself to look at familiar faces. Yet standing beneath the chandeliers of Blackthorne House, Evelyn no longer seemed like a frightened woman hiding from her past. She seemed ready to confront it. Adrian locked the library door. We cannot wait for Hawthorne to decide what to do with the evidence. What will you do? I will summon your family. Her expression tightened. No. They need to answer for what they did. They will answer, she said. But not because you command them. Adrian approached her. What are you asking? She lifted her chin. I am asking you to let me speak. He saw then how deeply the years had changed her. The young woman he remembered had possessed courage, but she had also believed courage meant surviving the expectations placed upon her. Nell had learned something harsher. Courage meant refusing to disappear. You will speak, Adrian promised. And if society calls me a fraud, I will stand beside you. If they say you have been deceived, I will stand beside you. If your title suffers? He looked directly into her eyes. My title survived Parliament, war, creditors, and scandal. It will survive the truth. For the first time she smiled. It was not the radiant smile he remembered, It was quieter, stronger. Then send for them. 2 days later, Blackthorne House glittered beneath hundreds of candles. The winter gathering had begun. London's finest families arrived beneath a cold moon, their carriages rolling over wet stones while servants hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside, silk rustled, diamonds flashed, and conversation moved like perfume through the crowded rooms. Nobody knew why Adrian had summoned the Vale family. Everyone suspected scandal. Evelyn waited upstairs. She wore a simple ivory gown, modest in design but elegant in its restraint. Her chestnut hair was gathered into a low chignon, with a single pearl pinned above her ear. She looked neither like a servant nor like the sheltered heiress society remembered. She looked like herself. Adrian entered her room. For a moment he simply watched her. "You need not do this," he said. "Yes, I do. You could leave tonight." She shook her head. "I have spent 5 years leaving." He lowered his gaze. She reached for his hand. "If I return to society, I will not return as the woman they buried." Adrian closed his fingers around hers. "Then return as the woman who survived." Together they descended the staircase. The ballroom fell silent. Lady Vale gasped. Lord Vale turned white. Adrian stopped at the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "5 years ago I was informed that Lady Evelyn Vale had died." A murmur swept through the crowd. "Tonight, I ask you to look carefully at the woman standing beside me." Every eye turned toward Evelyn. She felt the old terror rise inside her, but she did not retreat. "My daughter died," Lord Vale said suddenly. Evelyn looked at him. "No, father." The single word struck harder than a shout. "I was hidden." Her mother began to weep. Lord Vale stepped forward. "You have been manipulated." Evelyn's voice remained steady. "Then explain why you forbade the physician from naming the body." Silence. "Explain why there was no grave." Another silence. "Explain why you sent letters to every person who knew me, warning them never to speak my name." Lord Vale's face collapsed. Adrian stepped beside her. But Evelyn raised one hand. This was her moment. "I will not ask you to love me," she said to her family. "I will not ask you to regret what you did. I only ask that you stop calling my survival a lie." No one answered. Then the ballroom doors opened. Mr. Hawthorne entered, breathless, carrying a sealed envelope. He looked at Adrian. "I am sorry, Your Grace." Adrian's voice was cold. "For what?" Hawthorne looked toward Evelyn. "For helping them hide the truth." He placed the envelope into her hands. Inside was the final document. Her father's signature appeared beneath an order written 5 years earlier. At the bottom were 7 words that made Evelyn's hands tremble. "Ensure the Duke never learns she survived." Adrian read them. Then he looked at Evelyn. The room waited. Evelyn slowly folded the paper. "No more hiding," she whispered. And this time the whole world heard her. Adrian reached for her hand, but he did not pull her behind him. He offered it openly, leaving the choice entirely hers. Evelyn looked at his hand, then at the faces surrounding her, and understood that this was the first moment in years when nobody could decide her future for her. She placed her hand in his. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not a tear of weakness. A tear for the girl who had vanished, the woman who had endured, and the life she would now choose. Across the ballroom, her father lowered his head. For the first time, Evelyn did not lower hers ever again. For 5 years society had accepted her death because it was convenient. Now the dead woman stood beneath 100 candles, breathing, trembling, and refusing to disappear again. Lord Vale looked older than he had moments before. Evelyn finally spoke. "I wanted you to love me enough to tell the truth." Her mother covered her mouth. "We were afraid," she whispered. "You were afraid of losing control. You were young. You knew nothing of what those documents could have caused. I knew enough to know that innocent people were being used. And you would have destroyed this family." "No," Evelyn replied. "I would have stopped it from destroying itself." She was passing judgment without cruelty, and that distinction made her stronger. Lord Vale looked toward Adrian. "You cannot believe everything she says." Adrian's expression remained cold. "I believe what the evidence proves." He lifted the document Hawthorne had delivered. "There are signatures, payments, dates, and instructions. Your own signature appears beneath an order concerning Evelyn's disappearance." Lord Vale's composure shattered. "I never meant for her to suffer." Evelyn closed her eyes. "That is the tragedy, father. You believed suffering became acceptable whenever you called it protection." Adrian stepped toward her, then stopped. He would stand beside her, not in front of her. So he remained at her side. Evelyn looked at him and understood. That small restraint touched her more deeply than any declaration could have done. She turned toward the assembled guests. My name is Evelyn Vale. I was told to forget it. I was told that nobody would believe me. I was told that the Duke would grieve for a woman who no longer existed. But I existed. The room seemed to breathe with her. I worked for my bread. I slept in rooms where nobody knew my name. I scrubbed floors, washed linen, carried coal, and learned that dignity does not come from silk. Her eyes found Adrian's. It comes from refusing to surrender your soul. A tear escaped, but she did not wipe it away. Adrian stepped forward. For 5 years I mourned Evelyn Vale. He looked around the room. Tonight I discovered that I had been wrong about one thing. Evelyn's breath caught. I did not lose her 5 years ago. He turned toward her. I found her again. The ballroom erupted into murmurs, but Evelyn heard his voice. Adrian lowered himself onto one knee. The gesture stunned everyone. He was the Duke of Blackthorne, heir to an ancient title, yet he knelt before the woman who had once cleaned his floors. Evelyn, he said, I will not ask you to become my Duchess because society expects it. I will not ask you to erase what happened for the sake of my name. I ask only whether you will allow me to spend the years ahead earning the trust one lost when I believed their lie. Evelyn stared at him. 5 years ago, she would have accepted his proposal with tears and trembling happiness. Tonight, she smiled through tears for a different reason. You have asked me the right question. She offered him her hand. Yes. He rose, but she did not immediately move closer. There is one condition. Adrian smiled faintly. Name it. I will never again live as someone's possession. His expression softened. Then you shall never be mine. She looked surprised. He continued. You will be my wife if you remain your own woman. Something inside Evelyn broke open. She stepped into his arms. The ballroom disappeared. For the first time since her supposed death, she allowed herself to be held without fear. When the guests had departed and the candles burned low, Evelyn returned to the library. She stood before the locked cabinet. Adrian entered quietly. You should rest. I will. She opened the cabinet and removed a stack of books. I have been thinking. Dangerous habit. She smiled. I want this room changed. He raised an eyebrow. I want girls who work in houses like this to have access to books. I want servants to learn to read accounts, letters, contracts. I want women who have been told they are powerless to understand the language of those who hold power. Adrian listened. This is not charity, she continued. It is freedom. Then it is yours. Not ours. He shook his head. Yours. She looked at him with quiet gratitude. Months later, the unused west wing of Blackthorne House opened as a reading room and school. Evelyn chose every shelf, every desk, every book. She refused to have her portrait hung above the entrance because she did not want the place to become a monument to herself. She wanted it to belong to the girls who entered. One winter morning, Adrian found her kneeling on the marble floor cleaning dust from an old inscription. He stopped. For a heartbeat, he remembered the maid he had discovered 5 years after her supposed death. But Evelyn looked up, smiling. Your Grace, you are staring. I was remembering. She held out the cloth. Then help me. He removed his coat and knelt beside her. You will ruin your gown. She laughed. Then let it be ruined. Together they uncovered words beneath the dust. A house becomes a home when those within it are free. Adrian read them silently. Evelyn rested her hand over his. Once society had declared her dead. Once her family had erased her name. Once she had believed love meant being chosen. Now she understood. Love was not the hand that pulled her from the darkness. It was the hand that remained beside her after she had found her own way into the light. And when Adrian kissed her forehead, Evelyn did not feel rescued. She felt free. In the end, Evelyn learned that being forgotten does not mean being defeated. Her family could erase her name, take away her title, and convince the world she was dead, but they could never take away the strength she discovered within herself. And Adrian learned that true love is not about possessing someone or rescuing them. It is about standing beside them while they reclaim their own voice. The greatest lesson is simple. Never allow someone else's judgment to define your worth. Sometimes the life you are forced to rebuild becomes far more beautiful than the life that was taken from you. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message and comment below, I choose my own voice. And if you enjoy emotional Victorian love stories filled with secrets, heartbreak, and unforgettable endings, follow or subscribe for the next story. Until then, remember, You may lose your place in someone's world but never lose your place in your own.